Hello everyone! As with every character during their beta and pre-release, there is always a ton of discussion on whether that character is good or not, and Mavuika is no exception as the Pyro Archon. Due to their special status, every single Archon's kit has had a ton of concerns and criticisms from the community during pre-release and post-release, much more than the normal new character, as many people expect a lot of things coming from an Archon. So with Mavuika releasing pretty soon, I wanted to address some of the most common pre-release criticisms with her kit, with my thoughts on Mavuika's design and strength in the meta, and hopefully clear up some of the concerns and misconceptions people have with some TC-backed analysis. I will be releasing a complete pre-release guide on Mavuika covering her best builds and teams soon, as well as talking a bit more about her strength and pull value, so I highly suggest stopping to the channel if you don't want to miss it. Let's first address one of the biggest concerns of Mavuika's actual kit. Mavuika has both off-field and on-field forms that can be activated or switch between the two with her elemental skill. However, a big majority of her power comes from her elemental burst, which does a massive initial hit of damage, as well as buffing her on-field motorcycle damage, along with providing a damage buff to the current on-fielder with her A4 passive. However, this burst isn't charged with normal energy like every other character in the game. Instead, Mavuika needs Fighting Spirit to use her burst. She needs a minimum of 100, but ideally wants close to the max of 200 to get the max bust from her burst. Fighting Spirit can only be generated from your team either normal attacking or consuming Night Soul points, and this is where the restriction comes in. Mavuika's burst is very important for her performance in a lot of teams, and the best way to get enough Fighting Spirit to use her burst is through having other natlan characters on the team, since they can also consume Night Soul points. Sure, Mavuika herself consumes Night Soul points from her off-field damage, and she can produce just under the minimum amount of Fighting Spirit needed to use her burst, but Mavuika will commonly need to have at least one other natlan teammate to cash in on her burst. And in terms of natlan teammates, Sitlali and Xiangling specifically are two of her best supports, especially when considering Mavuika as a main DPS. Sitlali unlocks strong melt teams with her Cryo app and Pyro res shred, and Xiangling provides even more res shred, healing, and about 90 Fighting Spirit in about 2 seconds with her res shred activation. Add a Bennett to this trio and you have Mavuika's clear best main DPS team. Now the concern here is that not everyone is going to have both Sitlali and Xiangling, so do you need to have both of them for Mavuika to be a good main DPS? Definitely not. Ideally, you have at least one of them, and you can replace the other with either Farina or an animal support, and you'll still have an extremely high damage team. But even if you don't have either Sitlali or Xiangling, you can still make Mavuika work as a strong DPS, though you will see a damage difference without them. For example, you can run a Shover's Overload team with Auroron, and the team will still be pretty good. And even if you skipped all of these natlan characters, Kachina and Pyro Traveler are both free and are okay teammates to pair with Mavuika as substitutes for other natlan teammates. Because even if you have to use these more suboptimal natlan teammates, Mavuika's numbers are so high that these teams will still deal a decent amount of damage and be enough for Abyss. There even is some potential in Mavuika teams without natlan teammates where she just bursts every other rotation, solely relying on her own Night Soul consumption to charge her burst, though I do think that the best general recommendation is to pair Mavuika with another natlan teammate. So while Mavuika's best teams do include either Sitlali or Xiangling, you don't need to have them, as Mavuika can still work with other natlan supports, even the free-to-play ones, and those teams will still be fine. Consequently, the need for a natlan teammate to charge Mavuika's burst does restrict her team building, and it is understandable to dislike this as it limits her team building options. However, it isn't uncommon for an Archon to have team building requirements to access their power. For instance, Farina requires a healer for her HP drain and fanfare stack production, and Nahida forces the entire team to revolve around Dendro reactions. Now clearly Mavuika's restrictions are more limiting, but to me this is a deliberate design choice to lock Mavuika's insane amount of damage behind this team building restriction. And as I mentioned, you can still make her work with the free natlan units that are provided to all accounts. Now I've mainly discussed Mavuika's strength as a main DPS. This is because her kit is clearly designed to emphasize her carry potential, and her high numbers with her best teammates reflect this. However, one of the biggest criticisms I've seen about Mavuika is about this exact role. Mavuika is just another Pyro main DPS, and we've got so many of those already. This is 100% true. There are a multitude of Pyro main DPSs that have strengths in different team niches. Mavuika does make herself special in that she can work very well in all types of Pyro teams, including Vape, Melt, Mono Pyro, and Overload like Arlecchino. But on top of that, Mavuika can bring more damage on paper, along with a ton of quality of life such as resistance to interruption and a large AoE attack. But ultimately, if for instance you already have an invested Arlecchino, pulling Mavuika just for her main DPS capabilities isn't very valuable, as she doesn't bring that many new things. Arlecchino can do the job just fine. But Mavuika's kit isn't designed for her to just be a Pyro main DPS. She can serve as an off-field support, providing buffs and Pyro application, which is very valuable for a multitude of teams. And to me, this is where Mavuika's pull value lies. You're not just pulling for another Pyro main DPS with higher numbers. You're pulling for a Pyro main DPS that can also be played as a support, which to me increases her value a ton. Now this leads to the next big concern. I'm sure many people are aware that Mavuika has off-field capabilities. However, a good portion of people aren't too happy with it. The skill itself doesn't do much damage, and Mavuika can apply AoE Pyro from off-field every 2 seconds. In contrast, Xiangling still applies more Pyro. Thus, there are some teams where Mavuika's Pyro application won't be enough and you still need to use Xiangling. Although this is understandably upsetting for people who wanted to completely replace Xiangling with Mavuika in every single team, this doesn't make Mavuika bad as a support. This is a pretty big misconception, as I think Mavuika's strength as an off-field support is better than people realize, which is supported by pre-release TC team calcs. The reality is that in a lot of teams, Mavuika's Pyro application is perfectly sufficient enough to drive reactions. As a result, Mavuika serves mostly as a Xiangling alternative or upgrade in a lot of teams. On top of the off-field Pyro application, Mavuika provides good amount of personal damage through her burst and can buff the team with her A4 passive and 4P scroll if you use it. It turns out that Xiangling doesn't do much damage when you're using her just for her Pyro application, and the biggest benefit from using Mavuika is just the quality of life of just needing to press her skill to get the Pyro application versus having to worry about having enough energy for Xiangling to use her burst. Just to give a few examples of characters who are looking to get big buffs from Mavuika, Kanich really likes Mavuika as he's finally getting a source of 4P scroll alongside Mavuika's other benefits. Yes, Mavuika can't reactivate 4P scroll in pure burning on second rotation onwards, but that's going to be a problem for any Pyro scroll holder. And sure, using Mavuika's long animation burst can steal Bennett uptime from Kanich, but this can still be a damage gain due to Mavuika's burst dealing good damage. For similar reasons, Chaska will be getting a buff with Mavuika's release as well. Even though in most cases you'll be keeping Bennett on the team, which means you are losing some damage bonus and a potential bullet from Chaska's charge attacks, Mavuika is still looking to buff Chaska's team damage. And finally, even Malani will be buffed by Mavuika. Although it is true that Mavuika herself cannot provide enough Pyro for double Hydro Malani teams like with Farina, Malani can use other supports like double Geo, and by using these teams, Mavuika is looking to be a team damage upgrade for Malani alongside bringing in valuable quality of life. Other non-natlan DPSs like Navia and Cloran are also looking to get buffed by Mavuika, but I think by now you see my point. Mavuika is a strong Pyro support that is looking to buff a lot of existing units. The last criticism I want to address is the take that Mavuika doesn't meet the Archon expectation due to various reasons. For instance, Mavuika's off-field Pyro application from her skill doesn't have full uptime while all the other Archons do. The funny thing here is that Mavuika's skill not having full uptime is actually a good thing because it allows proper buff setup and uptime for rotations past the first. For instance, imagine a team with Wriothesley, Mavuika, and Xilonen. You can easily get a Cryo Crystallize with Xilonen on the first rotation to buff Wriothesley with 4P scroll, then use Mavuika's abilities to drive Melt. However, if Mavuika's off-field Pyro was permanently going and continuing to the next rotation, it would be impossible for Xilonen to proc another Cryo Crystallize to reactivate 4P scroll for Wriothesley. Mavuika having some downtime on her off-field Pyro application with a 15-second cooldown allows for more seamless rotations with proper buff uptime. I've also seen people say that Mavuika as the Pyro Archon doesn't synergize well with a lot of characters of her own region, but as I've explained already when describing Mavuika's strength as a support, this is just not the case when looking at the calcs. And it's not like all the Archons synergize well with the characters of their region. For example, Raiden doesn't work well with Ayaka or Yoimiya. Ultimately, the expectations of being an Archon or another powerful entity like an Elemental Sovereign are largely community driven, and in reality, they don't necessarily have to dictate the strength or design of a character's kit. That's up to the designers at HOYOVerse. And that's everything I wanted to talk about regarding Mavuika's concerns and criticisms. I guess the other big criticism about Mavuika is her design. I do agree that stuff like her motorcycle is kind of out of place, which seems to be the common theme of natlan designs, but personally, I think liking a design or not is very subjective, and I'm more of a kit person, so I'm sure I'm not going to mind too much driving circles on enemies to deal damage. I hope this video was helpful in addressing some of the common concerns that are floating around Mavuika's kit. While her kit does have some flaws worthy of criticism, Mavuika is still an extremely strong unit and will be a pretty valuable pull in my opinion. Again, I will be releasing a full guide on everything you need to know about Mavuika soon, so if you don't want to miss it, or if you enjoyed this video, consider giving the channel a sub. It helps me out a ton. And with that, I hope you all have a wonderful day.